see, how's the stream running? It's going. Let's see. Oh, all right, it's going. Okay, welcome back, guys. Stonks Maxxing, day 180. So today, gonna take a look again at Big Pharma, and I think something I want to do today is take a look at, or try to answer the question, how people in the US, how people across the world pay for drugs. Simple as that. So I do have some flashcards that I kind of want to go over. I think first one is, let me see, industry, healthcare. Here we go. So let's talk about some of the things I was able to learn today on Fisher Investments on healthcare. So that was a book that I found pretty helpful, and want to go over some flashcards that we can use from the book. So the phrase healthcare is a defensive industry, that typically refers to the idea that whenever you have a bear market, so that's whenever the stock market is in decline, the healthcare sector tends to outperform relative. The keyword here is relative. So relative compared to other sectors. And on the flip side, in a bull market, so when the stock market does well, healthcare tends to underperform relative to other sectors. And so this defensive nature of the healthcare sector, it really stems from the idea of elasticity. In the case of healthcare, a lot of the products and services are inelastic. So typically when prices or affordability, when affordability changes, and affordability is really impacted by two things. So one of them is the actual change in price for the underlying product or service. And the other part of affordability is the rise or decline in real wages. So it's kind of a double whammy. A peanut butter to a jelly, kind of. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, I guess. A peanut butter jelly combo. A yin and a yang. And so during times of economic downturns, when people don't have as many or as much money to spend, so typically means affordability declines, the demand for healthcare products or services is still high. You think of something like insulin, where insulin is needed whether or not you have a job. If you want to be able to monitor your blood sugar levels and keep it consistent at a healthy level, then you need that to survive. Tends to outperform relative to other sectors. During bear markets, it tends to underperform. Okay, you see how this is going? All right. So what are the top 10 selling drugs by revenue in 2024? Okay, this I do need to double check. I'm gonna skip this for now, but I believe the big ones to know are, number one is Keytruda, which is Merck's cancer drug. It's a checkpoint inhibitor, if I remember correctly, and it's used to target the PD-1 receptor on cancerous it's used to target the PD-1 receptor on T cells. I just want to make sure I get that right, because I think what the problem was, I think this is considered some type of immunotherapy, so it helps stimulate your immune system in order to fight off different parts or bad actors, bad cancerous cells. Yeah. So if I remember correctly, the PD-1 receptor is on a T cell and cancer cells. In order to inactivate or disable a T cell from preventing it from killing the actual cancer cell will typically bind to this PD-1 receptor. And what Keytruda does as a checkpoint inhibitor, checkpoint being PD-1, and the inhibitor is basically a block, so it stops the cancer cell from binding with that receptor. And it does that by creating an antibody typically. That antibody will bind with the receptor itself, so it effectively creates this shield between the cancer cell and the T cell, and with that, the T cell can correctly identify the cancer cell and pretty much run it over like a semi-truck. So that's Keytruda, and that's also Imbruvica as well, which is another checkpoint inhibitor that's owned by AbbVie. It was actually bought by AbbVie from Pharma, an acquisition. I think that happened in almost 2017. Robert Duggan. It was originally started by Richard Miller, who was a research scientist and oncologist, but then it was essentially taken over by Robert Duggan, who ended up taking that company to FDA approval for its TPK or BTK, Burton Tyrosine Kinase. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. That inhibitor, which is another checkpoint inhibitor. Sorry, I think this one isn't a checkpoint inhibitor. I'm thinking of Opdivo, which is a Bristol Myers Squibb's. Yeah. So I'm kind of mixing those up, but let's get back on track. So Novo Nordisk, they have Ozempic. Eli Lilly's Mounjaro's Zepbound. We also have Eliquis, which is a Pfizer and Bristol Myers Squibb anticoagulant, so it helps reduce blood clots in your system. We also have Biktarvy, which is a HIV drug made by Gilead. So Gilead is a big antiviral company that does produce a lot of drugs to help treat but not cure HIV. We also have Humira, which is to treat rheumatoid arthritis, although that's gotten off patent expiration. I'm trying to think. There's definitely a few other ones I'm missing. I know two from Johnson & Johnson. I think Stelara, which could be a plaque psoriasis. Okay, I think Dupixent, which is a drug made by Sanofi, which is used to treat atopic dermatitis, which is basically eczema. And we also have Skyrizi by AbbVie again. So that is used to treat plaque psoriasis, which is a skin condition. And Stelara, I believe, is also used to treat plaque psoriasis. And one of them, another drug is to treat multiple myeloma. Another Johnson & Johnson drug, Darzalex. Okay. Biktarvy, Eliquis, Dupixent, Darzalex. Okay. So I'll do this again. And when looking at the healthcare industry in the US, what are the entities that pay for care? Yeah, so this is kind of getting into the root question of what our stream is here for today. Who actually pays for the healthcare? And you can think of it maybe in two segments. Again, like PB and J, peanut butter and jelly. Peanut butter is going to be the private sector. So these are insurance companies, and these are individuals themselves. And then the jelly really is the government. So federal government, which usually is in charge of Medicare, and then the state government, which is in charge of Medicaid. And that's it. Just like PB and J. So what was the total US healthcare spending in 2023, right? What was the year-over-year growth in percent? So I think somewhere about 17%, 17.4% year-over-year growth. And I believe total spending, I want to say, was maybe like $7.9 trillion US. Oh, fuck. 4.9 trillion. So up 7.5% year over year. I guess I'm getting something wrong. I think this is 17.4% of the total global, not global, but US GDP, which is probably about 23 trillion in 2023. So 4.9 trillion. That's a lot. That's a lot. Annual sales of Keytruda from 2022 to 2024. So from 2022, you had, I believe, 20 billion. 2022, you had, 2022, about 20 billion. I think 20.9, maybe 21. 2023 was about 25 billion. And then in 2024 was about 29 billion. Yeah, 20.9, okay. 25 and 29.4. What amount of US GDP was spent on healthcare in 2023? Give a dollar amount and percent amount. So dollar amount, that number was $4.9 trillion, and percent amount about 17.4%, 17.6%. Okay. So checkpoint inhibitor. The checkpoint inhibitor, what that basically means, it's a type of drug that will inhibits some type of cancer from bonding with a checkpoint receptor. So checkpoint is typically used to refer to a critical part of some type of immune cell that will help that immune cell either identify a cancerous or an antigen in the body versus a healthy or non-hostile cell. So common checkpoint is PD-1, which is what the drug Keytruda and Opdivo both, let's see, does Opdivo targets the PD-1 checkpoint. Okay. Right. So they block this key receptor from being binded with a cancer cell, and that does help the T cells or the immune cells to help fight off cancer better. So examples of this are Opdivo, which is Bristol Myers Squibb, and Keytruda, which is Merck. Yeah. Okay. So is the PD-1 receptor only found on T cells, I think? I guess natural killer cells, okay. It's typically on T cells. Okay. Ken Fisher, what does he believe to be the contributing factor to rising healthcare costs in the US? So I think one of the biggest reasons is there's an oversupply. So this kind of goes back to economics 101. There's I was about to say over demand. That doesn't really sound like a word that makes sense, but the demand is far greater than the supply. So when you think about the factors that influence demand there's kind of there's a few things at play. I think the first one is imperfect information, which is really the idea that when you're shopping around for healthcare as a patient, most of the costs that you're going to have to pay for the underlying treatment, for the underlying service, isn't really covered by you. It's covered by a third party, so a health insurance company or the government. And so there typically isn't too much research going on, so you don't really care about the cost, and because of that, prices can be high, or you could probably buy more of something that is mispriced. I think that's maybe one way to put it. I don't know if that's the best explanation. I think that another idea is defensive medication or defensive medicine, which is the idea that doctors, in order to reduce their liability for, let's say, missing some type of disease or mistreating a patient, what they do then is they essentially try to schedule as many tests, even if they are unnecessary. They try to schedule as many treatments as possible, even if that may be unnecessary, in order to limit the liability in case that they end up missing something or mistreating something. So that's the idea of defensive medicine that probably does create artificial demand that doesn't need to be there. And there's also this idea that hospitals, they can't turn away any patient even if they don't have health insurance. Back when this book was written in 2009, 2010, about 15% of people didn't have health insurance in the United States. So what does that mean? That means that the hospitals, they have to eat the cost. It's like a bully trying to get your lunch money, although it's maybe a bad analogy. Maybe it's like the friend or that teammate that got an A on the group project but didn't really do any work. They can't really pay for the service, but that means other people, either the hospital or other patients that go to the hospital, or the government has to cover that. So that's kind of like the factors affecting the demand side. I think on the supply side, there's another few ways to think about it. The first way is the service providers, so the doctors, nurses. They're pretty limited supply of doctors and nurses today. If you think about the path becoming either of these professions, it takes years of schooling. You have to go through an undergrad, you have to go through medical school, you have to go through, I believe, an apprenticeship or like a shadowing. I don't know the exact term, but at least residency. I think residency is the term. So you have about 10 years of schooling and training to become a doctor. So the supply there is very slow and doesn't really catch up with demand in time. So the supply is pretty consistent in the short term. You also have the supply side for the actual drugs, and you can think about the research and development efforts for a lot of these blockbuster, really innovative drugs. They take years. I think there's a podcast about the formulation of tirzepatide, which is Eli Lilly's insulin and weight loss drug, Mounjaro and Zepbound. And apparently that was being researched on back all the way from 2017. So that's about 6-7 years before it was actually approved by the FDA. And I think it was a result of another previous clinical trial that they did, and they were able to use those results to then build on top of that. So the supply side for the drug industry is also very slow. Yeah. Distribution systems, I think. That's the supply side. Okay. distribution system, so government's health insurance formularies. Okay, I think this one refers to the idea that governments, they sometimes set artificial price ceilings or maybe even floors. I guess a ceiling would really hinder a lot of these drug manufacturers to produce something that they believe is rewarding, and a price floor maybe could help stimulate further production of some type of product if they're guaranteed at least let's call it a 20-30% margin. Insurance formularies are also another big deal. You can think of a formulary as basically a list of drugs, a tiered list of drugs, where if you're on a lower tier, like a tier 1, tier 2, that means that the insurance company will cover more of the cost of that drug. Typically, I think the first tier is probably some type of generic drug where the cost of that drug itself, the list price, which is like the manufacturer's suggested retail price, it's typically lower than the brand name price. So you can think of it as, let's say, a Kirkland versus a Gucci sweater. So what is the phrase healthcare is defensive industry? Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier. Healthcare as a defensive industry is just referring to the idea that over time, when you typically have these bear markets, healthcare performs relatively better than other types of industries. And in bull markets, healthcare tends to underperform compared relative to other industries. And the characteristics of these defensive industries is there's typically an elastic demand for their products or services. And this really stems from kind of two factors. All of it relate to affordability. And this is just the idea that if prices fall or rise, typically doesn't really change the quantity demanded. And when your wages fall or rise, it doesn't really change the quantity demanded. Okay. Crickets. I'm pretty tired right now, so feeling it right now. Okay, Darzalex was the Johnson & Johnson one. So that one was the multiple myeloma, and Stelara was the other Johnson & Johnson for plaque psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis. So when looking at the healthcare industry in the US, what are the entities that pay for care? So again, this goes back to the public versus private discussion. Public, federal, state governments, and the private side, insurance companies, individuals. Just like PB&J. Total US healthcare spending in 2023, year-over-year growth in percent. So $4.9 trillion and U.S. healthcare spending at about 7.4% year-over-year growth from 2022, 7.5% year-over-year growth. Call it. What amount of GDP was spent on 2023? So 4.9 trillion, and percent was about 17.6. Yeah, not just 76, 17.6. Does that ring any bells? I don't think so. When we look at other companies and their numbers. The 3 Ps of healthcare. So the 3 Ps of healthcare, I believe, are the patient, the provider, and the payer. So think about when you have some type of transaction or some type of products for some type of service, then you want to keep those 3. It's like the who, what, where, when, why, how. But in this case, it's the payer, provider, and the patient. What is CDER? What does it stand for? What does it do? So CDER is Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. It's an organization within the FDA. Let's see, is CDER still a thing actually? Okay, so it is still a thing. I think the office the map OPP OBP. Okay, maybe OBP is the thing that got screwed up. Okay. Oh, Substack. So what does it do? I think so the CEDAR is basically in charge of all of the approvals, the regulation of drugs within the US. So think an Ozempic, Mounjaro, a Zepbound, a Keytruda, any drug that's marketed within the US, it's regulated and approved by the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research within the FDA. Okay. Effect of imperfect information on the demand for healthcare. So this is where we're going back to earlier, the idea that if you're a patient in the US, typically you're not thinking about the cost of whatever product or service you're using. You're having a third party, either a public plan, public health insurance plan like Medicare, Medicaid, or some type of private insurance plan like a health maintenance organization or a preferred party organizations. I think that's what it's called. So either of those are the big ones. I think you also have a hybrid of the two. I forgot. I think it's like point of sale, POS, and then another type that I'm not entirely sure what it is. But the basic underlying idea is that you're not paying for it, so you don't really think about the cost. And because of that, sometimes you pay for something that isn't worth what you're paying for, or you might be less concerned about your spending, so you're more frivolous with money. You want to make sure that you are taking care of your body and you're spending it as much as you can. And I think another part of this is the idea that if you are uninsured in the US and you go to any hospital, the emergency room, there's no way that they're going to turn you away. I'm pretty sure that's illegal. So if you think about group projects where half of the team, I'd say 4 out of 5 people, they do all of the work, but there's that one person that doesn't do anything but still gets an A on the group project. It's kind of a similar case here where you have a larger group of population that is insured that technically or theoretically has to cover all of the people that are not insured. So maybe they have to pay more when they're going to a hospital, or the hospital eats the cost and is asking the government for some help. How are rebates used in the pharma industry? So I think this is really interesting. This is where the pharmacy benefit managers really come into play. And what they do is they essentially go to these drug manufacturers and say, hey, look, there's something called a formulary. We want to get your products on the top of that formulary. So if it's on the top, that means the health insurance company is going to pay for more of that percent of the cost. So the underlying patient who's buying that drug has to pay less out of pocket. That's a good thing for consumers. It's a good thing for the drug manufacturer because that's typically more demand for their product. But if you want to get on top of that formulary, you're going to have to give us some type of incentive. So rebates, that's typically some cash back. And sometimes people argue that this is kind of what's causing some of the unaffordability of drug prices. If you think about the list price, typically the list price is not a good representation of the actual price that combined health insurance and a patient will pay. But if you are an uninsured patient without health insurance, you still have to pay that list price and you're kind of screwed there. So what is the idea of defensive medicine? How does it affect healthcare demand? So this is an idea we talked about earlier, defensive medicine, which is the idea that you're a doctor and you're dealing with patients' lives. So that's a very critical and something that you are liable for. And you fuck up, it can really devastate you financially. At the end of the day, if you're a doctor, you're still running a business, especially if you're doing your own practice. And even if you aren't, you want to protect yourself. Even if you make mistakes, nobody's perfect. So, defensive medicine is the idea of overscheduling testing, overscheduling services, overscheduling doctor meetups in order to limit the liability, basically overtreating a patient so that you can cover your ground just in case you make a mistake. And this can kind of create this artificial demand for healthcare because some of this, maybe even most of it, isn't necessary. So maybe getting your blood drawn every week, that might be an extreme case, or getting an MRI scan for something that doesn't really need an MRI scan. Getting surgery for something that can just heal on its own. Increases the demand for healthcare because patients will need to see more providers. Got it. So what are the major types of health insurance plans? Please describe them and provide some examples. So major health insurance plans, you have a fee-for-service and you also have managed care. So those are the two big ones. I think fee-for-service is a less common one these days. It used to be big, but I think it's very costly to actually manage and administer. But original Medicare, I believe Parts A and B were a fee-for-service, and I think probably still is. You also have these Cigna or Blue Cross Blue Shield indemnity. I don't know what indemnity means, but indemnity plans that still operate as a fee-for-service. I think the underlying definition of this type of plan is you have some type of provider that provides a healthcare service for a patient, and that cost is split between the health insurance and then also the patient itself, but that cost is for every single type of service. So let's say you get blood drawn, that's half and half maybe. You have an MRI scan, that could be 80-20. So whenever you do some type of operation, some type of checkup, your health insurance will help you cover a portion of that. The other is a managed care type of insurance plan. And the common examples here, I believe, are a health maintenance organization plan, a preferred payer organizations plan, or a point of sale plan. So the idea here is that you're more limited into the types of people you can visit, maybe the services that you can do. That's actually covered by the health insurance itself. But it is cheaper because I think what they do is they typically create a network. I really mean the health insurance company, or let's say the government, if it's a government-sponsored plan. What they do is they essentially curate a network of doctors, of service providers, and that helps lower the cost of actually the coverage itself. So examples of this, I think, are probably a Kaiser Permanente HMO plan, a United Health Group PPO plan. So a lot of the private insurers do this. Traditional indemnity plans. So what does indemnity mean? Insurance. It's okay, so I guess it's just a word for saying that, okay, we're gonna help cover some of your losses. All right, that's cool. Nice. Managed care, health insurance will arrange an network providers to provide service at a discount rate. Typically, patients on a managed care plan just pay a copay. Okay, let me actually ChatGPT this because it doesn't sound right. Do people under a managed care plan typically only pay a copay if they use in-network providers and will have to pay out of pocket for out of network providers. So let's see. For in-network providers. So actually is the Blue Cross Blue Shield government basic plan a fee for service? Health insurance plan. Preferred provider organization plan. Okay. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I'm gonna do good for now. When does Kingfisher believe to be the contributing factor? Okay, so this is kind of going back to the supply side versus demand side. Right now, there is too much demand for the limited supply of health care products and services. And if you think about the supply side right now, there's really three big factors. Human capital is the first one. Think the doctors and nurses that have to go through 4 to 10 years of medical school, of undergrad, residency in order to actually be part of their profession. So supply there is really constrained in the short term, and it's very consistent in the short term. You also have the intense long-term R&D projects needed and actually to take a drug from an idea into markets. And finally, the distribution. So you think about government regulation on certain types of drugs, and I guess the distribution of these drugs by formularies, insurance companies. Three P's of healthcare: the patients, the providers, and the payers. I'm gonna go easy on that. According to GICS, industry groups that comprise the healthcare sector. So you have biopharma, or I guess biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, and life sciences. You also have healthcare equipment and services. Major types of private insurance plans. So health maintenance organizations, preferred payer organizations, point of sale, and I guess more consumer oriented. Let's see, consumer directed plans. Okay, let me try to define these a bit more. So what are insurance plans? Can you verify my definitions of the following call them managed care plans. So HMO, how should I describe this? So health maintenance organization insurance plan, it's the most restricting type of health insurance plan where it's typically the cheapest. So you pay the lowest amount of copays, lowest amount of deductibles, but you're very limited to only a certain network of providers. Cool. To a limited network of providers. If you are seeking services outside of the network, then costs are typically uninsured. So PPO. So more expensive, but provides more coverage outside of the network. POS, I actually don't know, not entirely. A hybrid between the two, but not entirely sure. Okay. Okay, so preferred provider organizations. So, okay, I didn't realize that you need, so do all HMOs require a primary care provider? Health insurance plan that revolves around a primary care provider, so a PCP. This is typically required in most HMO plans that refer to in-network specialists. Copays, deductibles, oh god. Premiums are typically the lowest, but out of network coverage is basically non-existent. So, what's a good analogy actually for these private health insurance plans? It's like a centralized system this health maintenance organization. More expensive health insurance plan does not require a primary care, we'll call it a PCP, and provides some coverage out of network. Okay. For you to preferred provider. Okay. Preferred provider is you have more freedom to choose a provider, doctor that you prefer. So preferred provider organization. Oh shit, okay. Your preferred provider is the insurance company is I'll call it, yeah, I guess that's a good word. Encouraging you to use the preferred in-network providers, but you are not limited, we'll call it not exclusively down to them like in a HMO. Okay. So the idea of preferred provider is that the insurance company. So the idea of preferred provider is that the insurance company is encouraging you to use the preferred providers, but you're not like in HMO. Okay. Is a So this is a blend between the two types of insurance plans, HMO and PPO. Okay, I'm gonna just stop this here, point of service. I kind of want to finish the book tomorrow. I think that would be a bit more helpful. Yeah. But this is hard. Okay. So I think that's good for flashcards for now. And take a look to see if the stream is still fucking up. Alright, no, it's pretty good. Okay. So I got 10 more minutes until we hit an hour, so I think I'll probably stop there. But let's try to kind of gather our thoughts and see where we want to go from here. I think for the sake of the big pharma industry in 5 minutes, so revenues, R&D, profits. Maybe it's like the NBA draft. I feel like there's an interesting analogy there to be made. Like the pharmaceutical industry as, I guess, an allegory of the pharmaceutical industry being how sports teams, the NBA, the NFL, they draft these young prospects, nurture them, invest in their ability to grow, and hopefully eventually win a championship team because of that. And then you have the Golden State Warriors. They typically, I guess this is like the law of large numbers. The Golden State Warriors, one of the teams that won the most number of championships in the past decade. I think 4 within the past decade. So these actually were also the ones that spent the most on their roster, right? Call it NBA / NFL analogy. Pharmaceutical companies like the NBA, like NBA teams, drafts, drug discovery, clinical trial process, rookie season development. Okay, I guess like rookie season equals phase 1 clinical trials. Phase 2 and beyond. Okay. Championship equal blockbuster drug. Okay, so I think that could be an interesting analogy to make. Let's see. So let's open up Excel. I haven't opened up Excel in a while. right, let's wrap this text. And let's create pharmaceuticals. All right, let's create some flashcards here. Go to Eli Lilly. So Pfizer and Merck. So do these for now. But okay. So what is the high level summary of Eli Lilly's founding story? So Eli Lilly was founded by Civil War Colonel Eli Lilly in 1876. Okay. That is, wow, 149 years ago. Sorry, 249 years ago. No, 149 years ago. Okay. Almost 150 years ago. The best-selling drug at the time was, during its startup / early growth years, was a drug called Sucus alternus. That was a blood purifier. Treatment for syphilitic frictions. Oh fuck. Insulin came in during the 1920s. So that's actually a lot earlier than I thought. Guess I can. Okay, here we go. Yes. Okay. So Pfizer. Citric acid. So what was the high level founding story of Pfizer? Okay. So Charles Pfizer and Charles Earhart, even before Eli Lilly. So I guess this is before the Civil War. Interesting. There's just showing plan. Let's get in 2014. Got it. Okay. Oh shit. Okay. Browse. Let me change deck. Let's move it to Merck. Okay. Merck AbbVie spun out of Abbott Labs. Right. Okay. Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Novo Nordisk, August Crow, and H.C. Hagedorn. Novo was founded by Thorvald Peterson, 1924, after getting kicked out of Nordisk. Two companies eventually merged in 19. Yeah, there's a whole Acquired podcast about this. So, alright. Okay, I'll do Amgen. Amgen sounds interesting. Okay. Oh, what the? William K. Bowes. It's cool. So recombinant drugs, I think recombinant DNA technology, I think is cloning some type of gene. Epigode. So let me actually look that up. What is... Okay, so yeah, let me actually add one more. So what is the idea of combinant technology? Let's try to use our context clues, right? So is like reproducing, you're doing something again. Combinant is like you're combining something, right? Combine. So I think you're like combining two things together, and you're combining an existing, we'll call it a gene. So to stimulate type of chemical process. is recombinant DNA technology used to produce monoclonal antibodies. Recombinant DNA technology is the idea of taking some type of gene, cloning its inserting it into a host cell, then feeding that host cell some yeast, I guess an enzyme, like a biological. Cloning, they're isolating, cloning specific gene into another organism so that the host organism can produce a desired protein or chemical. Source, honestly, this is just ChatGPT right here. Okay. Alright, so with that, I'll probably end this here. I think we did a pretty good job today going over some flashcards. I was able to get a better understanding of how people pay for things in the healthcare space. So we went over private health insurance plans, the difference between a fee-for-service and a managed care health insurance plan. We went over health maintenance organization health insurance plans. We also went over the preferred payer organizations health insurance plans. We also talked about the demand and supply factors within the healthcare industry. On the supply side, it's human capital from doctors and nurses, it's long lead times and long research times for drugs, and distributions when it comes to government regulation and formularies. On the demand side, we have imperfect information, which can lead to companies paying or covering products or services that cost more than they should, or customers are spending more frivolous because they don't have to have the responsibility of paying. You also have the idea of group project where majority of the members contribute to it, and maybe there's a few stragglers that aren't getting enough work done but still get the grade at the end. It's kind of a similar idea with the healthcare industry with insured and uninsured patients. Uninsured patients, sometimes these guys are admitted to hospitals. I mean, it makes sense, right? They need to survive, they need the care, but that does come at a cost to the hospital. They either charge more to the insured people or they have the government take care of it. So those are the big themes, I believe. We also have one more thing on the demand side, the idea of defensive medicine, which is whenever you have a doctor that does not want to be liable for any mistreatment or any misdiagnosis, they typically schedule you for unnecessary or maybe an abundant number of tests, of visits, of services that may be unnecessary. I think outside of what we learned about today, reading the Fisher book, some of the key things that we talked about was the top 10 selling drugs in 2024. Keytruda, top of the list, $29 billion. up from 25 billion in 2023, up from 20.9 billion in 2022. That, along with Opdivo, which is a Bristol-Myers Squibb drug, are both checkpoint inhibitors, specifically for the PD-1 receptor, typically found on different types of immune cells. And we also learned about recombinant DNA technology, isolating a gene, cloning it into a host organism, and taking that host organism and hopefully creating some type of protein or chemical that could be used for a drug. We also talked about some of the other drugs. So aside from Opdivo, aside from Keytruda, we also had Biktarvy, which is a Gilead drug for HIV. We had Ozempic from Novo Nordisk. Darzalex, which is to treat multiple myeloma, from Johnson & Johnson. Skyrizi from AbbVie to treat plaque psoriasis. Stelara, also from Johnson & Johnson, to treat plaque psoriasis. Dupixent, which is an atopic dermatitis, eczema, and Humira, which is a rheumatoid arthritis by AbbVie. Probably missing one, but I think those are the big themes. We also talked about pharmacy benefit managers, so how they're all involved in this entire space. And I believe the final, I'll end here, the two different types of sectors, we'll call them industries within the healthcare sector. So pharmaceuticals, life sciences, and biotechnology, that's one, and then healthcare equipment and services. So that's what we learned today, and that's what we recall today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.